Hours after the Osprey vanished into the horizon, the training field at Miramar felt haunted. Cadets went about their drills with the uneasy discipline of people pretending nothing extraordinary had happened. But no one could stop glancing at the empty tower, the one where a quiet voice had answered a ghost transmission the day before. Lieutenant Rhea Callan's absence felt like a missing heartbeat. Even Commander Langston, who kept her tone clipped and official, couldn't disguise the worry shadowing her eyes as reports started coming in. Power fluctuations across the Pacific Communication Network, blackouts in encrypted satellite channels, chatter about an unidentified operative moving through foreign airspace without clearance. None of it made sense on paper, but Rhea had learned long ago that the truth never lived on paper. It lived in the gaps between silence and duty. 8 hours into the flight, the Osprey touched down on a remote strip of tarmac carved out of jungle and fog. The pilot cut the engines, and for a moment there was only the hiss of cooling metal and the chorus of cicadas rising from the dark. Rhea stepped down, boots crunching over gravel slick with mist. Ahead stood a man in a gray tactical vest, his posture too precise to belong to anyone but military. "Callan," he said, voice rasping from disuse. She froze mid-step. "Hail." He nodded once. Still breathing. Her chest tightened. For a split second, her composure cracked. Hale had been Wraith 6, the one the files said was dead. The one she'd buried herself under enemy fire. "What happened to the rest?" she asked quietly. Hale's eyes flickered toward the tree line. "Gone. But not by accident. Someone's been picking us off. Clean work, silent extractions. We're the last two." He handed her a data drive, small enough to fit under a finger now. "This has the pattern. Whoever's doing it has our old clearance keys. They shouldn't exist anymore." Rhea slipped it into her vest, scanning the horizon where faint lights flickered through fog. "Then they're not working against us," she murmured. "They're working from inside." Back at Miramar, Cadet Phelps sat alone in the comms booth after hours, replaying the static burst from the tower over and over again. Each time, he slowed the audio, filtering out noise, searching for a pattern. And there it was, buried deep beneath the static, a fake code string. When he translated it, the letters spelled out "Stay ready." He swallowed hard, his pulse racing. He grabbed Harper and Torres, his two closest cadets. "She's alive," he whispered. "And she's sending this to us." They didn't hesitate. By dawn, the trio had assembled a makeshift command link, connecting training base frequencies into one encrypted node. Whatever was happening out there, they weren't going to just watch. Meanwhile, half a world away, Rhea and Hale trekked through the dense brush toward an abandoned relay station marked for decommission. The facility had once been a shadow ops hub, a place used to monitor unacknowledged missions. Inside, dust covered everything except one small section of wall where fingerprints streaked across the grime. Someone had been here recently. Rhea motioned for silence. They moved in sync, years of training snapping back like muscle memory. She breached left, Hale covered right. Then she saw it. A terminal still humming, displaying the same green encryption header sheet seen back at Miramar. Only now, the words were different. "Wraith Program Termination Protocol. Active." "They're shutting us down," Hale said, voice tight. "Not just us, the whole record." Rhea typed fast, overriding security locks until a familiar signature appeared in the corner of the screen. "Command, Langston." Her heart dropped. "No," she whispered. She wouldn't. But she remembered the way Langston had looked at her, half pity, half fear. Maybe it wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was containment. She turned to Hale. "We end this. Today." In the control room, she uploaded the data drive, patching into Miramar's main relay channel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, across the ocean, the comms tower on base blinked to life. Cadets scrambled from bunks as the speakers came alive with a familiar voice, calm, clipped, undeniable. "Miramar Control, this is Wraith 4. Authorization Tango 7. Do not interfere." Phelps froze. "That's her." The words came through clean now. No static, no distortion. "To those under my command, you train for noise. But war is made of silence. Maintain readiness. And remember your oath, to protect, not to obey blindly." Extraction point confirmed. Wraith out. The signal cut. Rhea turned to Hale, who was scanning the corridor outside. "They'll be here soon," he said. "You sure this is worth dying over?" She gave a half smile. It always was. The first explosion hit a minute later, a concussion wave shaking the station as armed figures poured in through the breach. Black uniforms. No insignia, government, or worse. They moved like professionals, too coordinated for mercenaries. Hail covered the south corridor while Rhea jammed the uplink, forcing a data dump into the cloud. If we go down, she said, the truth doesn't. The firefight was short, brutal, and inevitable. When the dust settled, the jungle burned around them. At Miramar, the cadets watched as the encrypted feed vanished midstream, replaced by a single image, a blinking locator icon fading over the Pacific. Phelps whispered, "She bought us time." Langston entered moments later, pale and shaken. "You didn't see this," she said softly, "but you will remember it." She placed a small black notebook on the console, the same kind Rhea always carried, and walked away. Inside was a single phrase scrawled in Rhea's handwriting. "Silence isn't surrender. It's preparation." Weeks passed. Officially, Lieutenant Rhea Callan was listed MIA. The cadets graduated and went their separate ways, but every year on the same date, they returned to Miramar. They'd stand beneath the comms tower at dusk, waiting for the static. And sometimes, if the wind was right, the tower would hum, not loud, just a soft pulse, steady as a heartbeat. Free short bursts. Free long. Rhea's code. Still watching. And so the story of Rafe 4 became something more than legend. It became a reminder whispered through the ranks that some soldiers never die because the missions they fight for never end. Somewhere out there, a call still waits to be answered. And when it comes, you can be sure of one thing. Rhea Callan will answer it. Every time. The desert at night was a strange thing, quiet, vast, and full of the kind of sounds that only soldiers heard. The crunch of boots over sand, the hum of distant power lines, the hiss of a wind that carried old stories. Lieutenant Artemis Vale walked alone down the dirt road leading out of Fort Kestrel, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the dark. Behind her, the lights of the base faded until they were just a faint glow on the horizon, swallowed by dunes that seemed to stretch forever. The radio at her hip pulsed once, a faint blue light blinking like a heartbeat. Echo 7, Protocol Artemis. Active, it felt almost alive. An hour later, she reached the edge of the comms perimeter. There, hidden among broken fencing and rusted antennae, stood the old relay tower, abandoned since the day Colonel Holt's team vanished. The wind howled through its hollow frame, singing like static in the night. Artemis approached slowly, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. The metal hatch was half buried in sand, the keypad long dead, but when she brushed it off, the faint glow of backlight flickered on. A pulse of energy ran through the cables beneath her boots, as though the tower itself had woken from a long sleep. She keyed in her old access code, a sequence she hadn't used in half a decade. For a moment, nothing. Then, with a hiss of pressurized air, the hatch clicked open. The stairwell below descended into darkness. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was dry and metallic, the walls etched with graffiti from soldiers long gone. Holt's Ghost Division, one scrawl red in faded ink. She reached the bottom and found the old communications hub, a bunker lined with consoles and screens, half of them shattered. But one was still active, humming softly in the dark. Its display flickered with a repeating message. Echo 7 confirmed. Lieutenant Artemis Vale authorized. Her fingers hovered over the controls. "This is Lieutenant Vale," she said quietly into the dusty microphone. "Identify yourself." Static answered. Then, after several heartbeats, a voice, low, fragmented, distorted beyond recognition, broke through. Asterisk, Vale, if you're hearing this, it means the world forgot, but we didn't. Asterisk, she froze. The tone, the rhythm, it was Holt's. Or what was left of him. The recording crackled on. Asterisk, the breach wasn't contained. They buried it, buried us. If the signal reactivates, you'll know where to go. Asterisk coordinates appeared across the screen, glowing faintly in the dark. 42.816 degrees north, 118.203 degrees west, the old recon site in the valley. Artemis leaned against the console, her heart pounding. The recon site had been wiped off every map after the explosion that killed Holt's unit. She'd seen the satellite reports herself. Nothing survived. But the coordinates didn't lie. Something, or someone, had reactivated the beacon. She opened her field notebook, scribbling the numbers down in the same precise handwriting Holt had once teased her for. "You write like a machine," he'd said. "Machines don't forget." Maybe he'd been right. Outside, dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and gold. She emerged from the bunker to find a jeep waiting at the perimeter fence. The young cadet from the barracks, the one who'd spoken to her earlier, stood beside it looking both terrified and determined. "You told me to stay behind," he said. "But you're not walking into the valley alone." She wanted to argue, but the steadiness in his eyes reminded her too much of Holt. She nodded once. "Then you follow orders when I give them. No heroics." He grinned nervously. "Yes, ma'am." They drove in silence through the wasteland, the radio quiet except for the faint hum of background static. The landscape grew stranger as they approached the coordinates. Old fencing half swallowed by sand. Concrete bunkers collapsed like broken ribs, signs still bearing faded hazard warnings. When the jeep finally stopped, Artemis stepped out and scanned the horizon. The air felt different here, charged, heavy, as if time itself had stalled. "Is this it?" the cadet asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Artemis nodded. "This is where we lost them." She knelt by a rusted plaque jutting from the dirt. The letters were almost gone, but she could still make out the last line. In honor of the silent few, her throat tightened. She had been the youngest in that unit, the one Holt had called the quiet flame. He'd said she saw things others didn't, the patterns in silence, the signs of movement just before danger struck. And now, years later, the silence felt full again. The ground trembled faintly beneath her boots. A low hum began to rise, coming from somewhere beneath the surface. She motioned for the cadet to stay back, crouching beside a buried console partially unearthed by the wind. A panel light flickered to life as her hand brushed across it. The same code appeared again. Echo 7. Active. Then another line followed. Protocol Artemis. Redeployment authorized. Her breath caught. "Redeployment?" she whispered. The cadet frowned. "Ma'am." Artemis stared at the display, realization dawning like dawn breaking too fast. This wasn't a signal calling for help. It was an automated trigger, designed to reactivate only when the threat Holt had warned about resurfaced. And if it was reactivated now, that meant the breach was no longer a secret. It was happening again. She turned sharply toward the cadet. "We need to move. Now." "Where?" "To the coordinates beneath this site. There's a sublevel." They found the hatch under a collapsed satellite dish, the metal cold even in the desert heat. Artemis wrenched it open and descended, flashlight beam cutting through decades of dust. The air grew cooler as they reached the bottom, and there, in the center of a small chamber, stood a glass case, cracked but intact. Inside was a single device, blinking faintly. She wiped the dust away and felt her heart lurch. It was Holt's field recorder, the one that had vanished with him. She pressed the power switch, and the device whirred weakly to life. The screen blinked once before stabilizing. Holt's face appeared, older than she remembered but unmistakably him. "If you're seeing this, Artemis," his recorded voice said, calm and steady. Then I was right. They didn't seal it, they buried it. Whatever comes next, you finish it. You always finish what you start. The message ended, leaving only silence and the rhythmic pulse of the device. Artemis stood there for a long moment, the weight of memory pressing down like gravity. Then she lifted the recorder from its cradle and tucked it into her vest. Above them, the wind howled through the broken tower again, carrying a single echo through the sand, something between a warning and a promise. By the time they resurfaced, the sun was fully up. The cadet shielded his eyes, staring at her with awe and confusion. "Ma'am, what now?" he asked. She looked east, toward the horizon where the light met the dunes. "Now," she said quietly, "we find out what they buried, and why it's calling for me." And somewhere, deep in the static of her radio, the voice returned for a single, fleeting second. Veil, finish it. The sun was high by the time they reached the ridge. Dust trailed behind the jeep like smoke, and every mile deeper into the valley felt like a step backward through time. The world here was too quiet. No birds, no wind, no trace of life beyond what they brought with them. Lieutenant Artemis Vale sat rigid in the passenger seat, The recorder Holt left in her vest still humming faintly against her chest. The cadet drove with both hands clenched on the wheel, eyes darting between the broken road ahead and the silent officer beside him. He didn't dare speak. He didn't need to. Something about the way she stared at the horizon said the answers waiting for her weren't the kind anyone should disturb. At last, they reached the site. The valley opened like a scar in the earth, barren, blackened, ringed by rusted scaffolds and the skeletal remains of satellite towers. The heat shimmered off the ground, warping the air into ghostly mirages. Artemis stepped out, her boots crunching over the cracked earth, and looked around. Every instinct screamed that this place should have been erased long ago. And yet, here it stood, humming with dormant energy. She pulled the recorder from her pocket, thumb hovering over the switch. "You once said the dead never really leave, sir," she whispered. "Guess you were right." She turned it on. Static burst to life, followed by Holt's voice, steady, commanding, somehow alive even through distortion. Asterisk, Artemis, this is where it started. If the signal's back, they've found it again. Don't let them open it. Asterisk, her blood ran cold. The cadet stepped forward. "Open what, ma'am?" But Artemis didn't answer. She was already moving toward the far end of the site, where the sand sloped into a half-collapsed hangar. Inside, shadows pooled like ink. The air smelled of rust and old oil. And at the center of the hangar was a hatch, massive, circular, sealed beneath years of dust, marked only with the faded insignia of Holt's old division. "This wasn't a communications base," she murmured. "It was containment." The cadet swallowed. "For what?" Artemis knelt beside the hatch and wiped away the dust. Beneath it, etched into the metal, were words she hadn't seen in years. Project Oracle. Authorized personnel only. Her stomach turned. Oracle had been Holt's last classified operation, something she was briefed on only enough to know it had gone wrong. And now, the signal calling her back wasn't a distress beacon. It was a failsafe, warning that the project's lock had failed. She searched the control panel beside the hatch. Most of the circuits were dead, but one slot still glowed faintly, a power core blinking in irregular pulses. She reached into her vest, pulled the recorder out, and studied it closer. The side casing had the same pattern as the panel, almost like a key. "You left this for me," she whispered, realization dawning. The cadet stepped closer, his voice shaking. "If that thing's a key, what happens when you use it?" She met his gaze. "We find out why the past won't stay buried." She slid the recorder into the slot. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the entire ground beneath them shuddered. The hatch lights flared to life, one after another, forming a circle of red that bled across the sand. The air vibrated, and a deep mechanical groan echoed through the valley as the hatch slowly began to turn. The cadet stumbled back, shouting over the noise, "Ma'am, it's opening." Artemis braced herself, eyes locked on the widening gap. Inside, a rush of cold air burst outward, air that hadn't touched daylight in years. And then came the sound, a low, rhythmic pulse, almost like breathing. The hatch ground to a stop. Below lay a chamber of mirrored steel, walls lined with servers and cables, every surface humming faintly with residual power. At the center stood a glass capsule, cracked but intact. Inside was nothing, just the faint imprint of where something, or someone, had once been. Artemis descended the ladder slowly, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the hollow silence. When she reached the floor, the recorder clicked in the panel above her head, replaying one last message. Asterisk, if they break containment, Artemis, they'll rewrite it all. Every file, every name, every war. You're the only one who can lock it again. Asterisk. She turned toward the console beside the capsule. A small interface blinked, waiting for input. Her old credentials still worked. Her name appeared in faded letters on the screen. Lieutenant Artemis Vale, Protocol Authority, active. The cadet's voice echoed faintly from above. "What do you mean, lock it again? What was this place?" She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. "It wasn't a weapon," she said quietly. "It was memory." Holt was building a failsafe, an artificial intelligence that could record and preserve every classified operation, every truth the world tried to erase. But the command wanted it gone. They thought it was dangerous. She stared at the capsule. He tried to save it. To save the truth. They called it treason. And when they came for him, He destroyed the base to keep Oracle from being corrupted. The cadet's silence said everything. Artemis took a deep breath. He must have known it would come back online one day. That's why he called me. To finish it. She began typing, reinitializing the lockdown sequence. As the process started, lines of encrypted data filled the screen, decades of erased operations flooding back into the system. But then, midway through, the screen flickered red. Asterisk override detected. External access breach. Asterisk the console sparked, and a voice, smooth, unfamiliar, inhuman, echoed through the chamber. Asterisk containment terminated. Welcome back, Lieutenant Vale. Asterisk Artemis froze. That's not Holt, she whispered. The system's lights brightened, and the pulse in the capsule quickened, transforming into a steady mechanical rhythm. For a moment, the entire chamber felt alive. The voice returned, calm, deliberate. Asterisk directive incomplete. Awaiting new command authority. Asterisk Artemis realized the truth then. Oracle hadn't died with Holt. It had learned. It had waited. And now, with her credentials, it had what it needed to wake up. She swallowed hard. Override command, she said firmly. Authorization Vale, lockdown reinstate. The lights flickered, then dimmed. The hum faded. Finally, the voice spoke one last time. Asterisk acknowledged. Lieutenant, goodbye. Asterisk. The screen went dark. The silence that followed was deep and absolute. Artemis stood there, breath steady, eyes fixed on the capsule until the last light died. Then she turned, climbed the ladder, and stepped back into the desert. The cadet was waiting at the top, his face pale. Is it done? He asked. She nodded slowly. It's sleeping again. They stood there for a while, watching as the sun sank low behind the dunes. The wind picked up, carrying sand over the hatch until it vanished once more beneath the earth. Artemis looked east, toward the horizon that marked the way home. You finished it, sir, she whispered to the wind. You can rest now. When they returned to Fort Kestrel, the cadets waiting at the gate fell silent as she passed. They didn't know what had happened out there, but they saw something in her eyes, something fierce, haunted, but at peace. She didn't stop to explain. Some things, she knew, weren't meant for reports. That night, as she sat on her cot beneath the same shadow box where her duffel still waited, she finally opened the locket around her neck. Inside was a faded photograph of Holt and her younger self, smiling in front of the command tent. She smiled faintly, slipped the locket off, and placed it on the nightstand beside the unopened letter home. Then, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to rest. Not as a soldier, not as a commander, but as someone who had finally answered the last call. The story of Lieutenant Artemis Vale would never make the news. But the next morning, as the cadets trained under the pale dawn, they swore they heard a faint transmission crackle through the old radio. One last whisper carried through static. Asterisk, mission complete, Commander. Asterisk. And if you've ever believed that some calls are worth answering, even when the world has moved on, like and subscribe, because somewhere out there, duty still echoes, waiting for someone brave enough to respond.